Now, President Cyril Ramaphosa has decried patriarchy as one of the key reasons for the ever-rising gender-based violence, not only in South Africa, but in the whole African continent. Delivering the keynote address at the African Union's Men's Conference, Ramaphosa expressed the need for the continent to adopt laws and policies to address true gender equality. Now, to help us unpack the psychology behind the culture of patriarchy in South Africa and in the continent, I'm now joined by a founder and executive director of GBV Monitor SA, Omogolo Taunyane. A very good morning to you. Thank you so much for your time. We heard President Cyril Ramaphosa saying that ending violence against women and girls is a collective responsibility, but the onus is perhaps greater on men. What do you see as some of the biggest challenges?
Good morning to you and to your listeners. Thank you for having me. It is correct, the point that President Ramaphosa has made, that it is a collective effort to eradicate GBV, but with more emphasis on men. We know that it is only through the perpetrators that gender-based violence can be eradicated. So it's a crucial step that he has taken to start moving the public messaging and the narrative away from what is it that women can do to end GBV and really placing that responsibility at the feet of men.
Which kind of societies or perhaps circumstances would you say that GBV is more prevalent, and the kind of narrative which embodies and perhaps exacerbates the culture of GBV?
Right. So if you look at, our quarterly crime stats report, you will see that it is women and children who are in rural and peri-urban areas who are at risk and vulnerable of gender-based violence. We've seen how in the top 10 it is in areas such as Bembe district, it is in rural areas such as Siki in the Eastern Cape and Inanda in KwaZulu-Natal. Those are the rural areas, and that's predominantly where women and children are mostly at risk of being victims and survivors of gender-based violence. And that speaks to the socioeconomic status and position of people who are most likely to be victimized in this manner, and is an indicator of where these interventions should be focused.
What about the importance of perhaps a critical interrogation on the assumptions around patriarchy, male chauvinism and sexism? What do you think it'll take to get there, to get to that point where we now are clear and can move forward and beyond it?
Right. So when we speak about, patriarchy, male chauvinism and sexism, we often think that it is perpetrated by men. But we know that it is a societal construct, and that includes women who can become emissaries of patriarchy as well. But I think when we're talking about gender-based violence and femicide specifically, we need to target our messaging to men and young boys. If we can invest intensively in social behavioral change programs that really start to elevate and foster a behavior that, one, respects and acknowledges the rights of, women, and also acknowledges their agency. And to say it is a woman's body for her to do as she pleases. And it is, on each individual's onus to respect that and respect boundaries and understand what is healthy, unhealthy boundaries and what is, violent and non-violent behavior. I think that is where our problem lies, and that's where we should be looking at.
You speak about social behavioral programs starting with young boys as they develop. How much of the education sector do you think perhaps the solutions could come from when it comes to some of the subjects like life orientation? How much of that could be channeled towards building and empowering men, boys?
Yes. So that actually was one of the commitments that President Cyril Ramaphosa had made at the first GBVF summit, and that was to invest greatly through the Department of Social Development in social behavioral change programs, because we know the evidence has shown itself around the world that once you start fostering a particular kind of messaging. We can call it propaganda or whatever word that you want to use. But when you intervene young and early, that's where you start building a different kind of society, the societies that we imagine, GBV-free societies, equal societies. Once you target families, because it's all good and well to have these campaigns like the 16 Days Activism Campaign, but once you start having conversations in intimate surroundings between close circles and networks to start driving the message that gender-based violence is an injustice and it is criminal, that's where you start seeing the differences, and we simply haven't scratched the surface as yet. What has happened to programs such as, Soul Buddies that really focused on young people, young boys and young girls to start building those social behavioral change? Where are those kind of programs, creative programs that speak in the language that young people understand and young people use? We simply don't have that. We're seeing a disinvestment in those programs rather than increased spending.
What kind of laws and policies do you think are needed here, or perhaps adjustments which need to be made on the current policies to really bring up a sense of accountability when it comes to behavioral and cultural norms?
Right. So when we start talking about what kind of a justice system we need, I would say we need a victim and survivor-centric criminal justice system. And when we talk about that, we are saying we are looking for a justice system that is responsive and in a very holistic manner to accommodate victims and survivors of gender-based violence. But what does that mean? I'll speak about how only 8% of reported rape cases will reach a verdict in our criminal justice system. So that means when Police Minister Bikele is talking about 11,000 rapes, as he has reported in the previous quarter, less than 1,000 of those will reach a verdict. We need to start asking ourselves why it is that way. What are the factors behind women dropping out of the criminal justice system? And what support mechanisms should be in place to ensure that they remain and see justice and realize access to justice to its very end? That's what we're talking about when we're saying we need judicial criminal justice reform. That's what we are talking about.
There was also a lot of talk and reaction to the long-term solutions, speaking to gender-responsive budgeting, which will go a long way in empowering women so that they have access to finance and also perhaps a channeling towards bettering education.
Right. So, gender mainstreaming, gender responsive budgeting can be done. It can be realized. But what we have in South Africa's situation is a Department of Women, Children and Youth that is completely removed in terms of being an accountability mechanism and holding all governments to account in terms of how are we spending our budgeting, what kind of programs are we allocating our budgeting towards gender mainstreaming and gender responsive budgeting. So we have the example, for instance, of the GBV Funds Fund, but even in that case, it is unable to start holding government as well as private sector accountable in saying, how are you using your budget effectively towards gender mainstreaming and gender responsive programming? So we have a government and a system in place where we work in silos instead of working together in unison, collaboratively, to ensure that we have bigger impact. That's where our problem is.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that. Speaking there to founder and executive director of GBV Monitor SA, Omogolo Taunyane. Thank you for your time.